Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the MCR. I am Thirsty. I got TJ here with me. Mac's kind of standing off being producer today, but anyway, I'm going to get this right out of the gate just because we want to try to squeeze in as much time as we can. We have a special guest with us now on the MCR phone lines. He's going to go by YP. My friend here, I worked with him at a company a couple of years back, but he is actually from Ukraine. He actually lived in the Ukraine when they were still under Soviet rule. So, he's going to be able to tell us about how the communists actually work and how it was like living under communism, for all those people that think that socialism and communism is the greatest thing since sliced bread. So, YP, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself and let us know what it was like living under Soviet rule.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. So I was born in the early 80s, and my early childhood was spent in Soviet Union, in Soviet Ukraine. When I was about 10 years old, Soviet Union fell apart, and then so I lived for a few years in independent Ukraine, and end of 1996 I came to the United States. So growing up under communism was a late stage communism, as I call it, was a pretty interesting experience because well, in the early days of communism, I guess there are a lot of people who believed in the ideology. That's what I hear from my grandparents. When I was growing up, hardly anyone did believe in it, but people were just kind of had the sense of hopelessness and a sense that it's never going to change. You were more like, I felt like that I was more likely to travel to moon as to travel to a different country because of the Iron Curtain. And there was a big difference between, what the official storyline was on TV and radio and what we saw in everyday life. But then in 1991, suddenly just the whole thing fell apart. It was such a rapid change, and the country just disintegrated in a matter of months. And what's interesting that, well, technically, the Soviet Union at the time had a large security apparatus, police, army. When kind of push came to shove, not a single person came out to defend it. It just kind of ceased to exist one day, just showing how little support the government had.
Now it's like when we were setting up this interview, me, you, and Mac were talking a little bit. And you said back then it was actually illegal not to work?
Yeah, so as far as
that's communism.
As far as rules and stuff, there's a huge difference between kind of how communism is portrayed, socialism, communism is portrayed in the West, by especially people in the universities, and the reality of it in places like, right now it's in North Korea, Cuba, and how it was in Soviet Union, East Germany. So it was a very repressive regime. Things that you can't even think would be forbidden war, such as Beatles music. Everything that could be produced had to go through an official kind of a censorship bureau, and they would crack down on things that you would never even think would kind of cause any concern here. As far as economic things, things were pretty different too. So, for one, you were not allowed to move. You were basically a serf. So there was a thing called propiska, which meant that like a residency permit. So if your residency permit is in a small town, it was nearly impossible to move to a big city. There were ways you could, some legal, some not. Some, often people had to bribe someone to get it, or, by marriage, or by very narrow channels through work. But whatever was, wherever you were born, for 99% of the people, that's the town you're going to die in. Moving back and forth was not really a thing. As far as work, too, and education. So as far as work, everyone had to work. Every able-bodied adult had to work. They pretty much assigned you where you're going to work. There was very little option as to you couldn't freely change the place of work. You hate your boss? Too bad. Working conditions are horrible, too bad. If you just quit, that was considered it was illegal. There was a law saying that if you're not working, kind of like a law against parasitism, they could put you in jail and force you to work anyways, but under much harsher conditions. So just kind of it's a long topic, but that's just a few examples of kind of how the communist propaganda different from communist reality.
YPTJ here. Are you able, I don't know with how much specificity you can answer this, but are you able to identify what area of Ukraine you originate from? There's a reason why I'm wondering this.
So I'm from central Ukraine. It's a small town halfway between Kiev and Odessa.
Okay, you're near the more central part of it. Because the reason why I want to ask is, and forgive us for here in America, but really all we know is what we try to sift through in the news. And it's my understanding that as you go east and southeast, the populace kind of becomes more pro-Russian, whereas when you go farther west toward Poland, therein lies the deeper Ukrainian ethnicity type of belief. I mean, if I'm making any sense. Is that true? Is there anything to that?
There is some truth to it. With any kind of things, there's like a grain of truth to it, but I'll need like back up like maybe 30 years. So back then, there was some cultural divide in the Western Ukraine, even during Soviet rule. They never really accepted Soviet rule, and there were active activists for a long time. So they didn't really. So the insurgency started during World War II, but it didn't even end until mid '50s. So that insurgency lasted against the Soviet state, against they were surrounded by Warsaw Pact, didn't get any support, and they were still fighting. So there's definitely more nationalist kind of sentiments there. But back 30 years ago, if you were to ask a regular Ukrainian citizen, who do you think you want to, kind of which path you would choose, I think there is some truth to what you just said. They all wanted to have independent Ukraine. Like, I think that's not, when people say pro-Russian, they don't mean be part of Russia, for one. They want to, so those people in the south and east, they wanted to have more, let's say, a country that with dual languages, versus people in the West wanted to have only one national language. They wanted to, as far as politically, be more allied with Russia back then. But while the Western part was definitely, they wanted to be part of Europe, they never wanted to have anything to do with Russia and so forth. So that was 30 years ago.
Okay.
Fast forward to 2014, when that revolution in Ukraine happened, and Russia attacked Crimea in eastern parts. That pretty much ended any support Russia had, even in eastern and southern Ukraine. Because while they did before think that, we maybe have warmer ties with Russia, the actual armed invasion turned all these, supposedly pro-Russian people, they were actually became more anti-Russian than the Western people because they felt betrayed. They felt like that was a stab in the back. And right now, most of the fighting is happening in the Russian-speaking parts of and so-called pro-Russian parts of Ukraine.
That's what I've heard.
But regular Russian-speaking Ukrainians are picking up arms and fighting Russians. And sometimes I've watched videos and I hear, both sides are speaking the same language. So one last thing I want to say is there's also a big difference between Russian-speaking and pro-Russian. There are a lot of no matter how you spin it, and it's changing, but no matter how you spin it, there's a lot of people, the president of Ukraine included, whose primary language is Russian. Russian is more widely spoken in very big cities, Ukrainian other than Lviv in the west. But again, I want to just stress that point that being Russian-speaking and have cultural kind of ties with Russia has nothing to do with being pro-Russian politically, especially at this point.
I gotcha. Okay.
So YP, we were going to break this up into two segments, but I think we're just going to crack it all down into one. You know, I know you got things you got to do. We got things we got to do. So, is there anything that you've seen on the news that that you can actually clear up with this invasion? Like, what do you know? Because I know you got friends and family over there. Is there anything you can clarify when it comes to why Russia decided to do this?
Well,
Yeah, that's the big
it's my
debate,
theory,
really.
but I think Russia feels threatened by a successful independent democratic states nearby, because despite all the like Russian propaganda, it's kind of, I think Russia in the way it's structured is more similar to a typical Middle Eastern state. It derives its wealth from natural resources, mainly oil and gas. Its elites, none of them, even though they inside the state they promote extreme nationalism and extreme so-called patriotism. What is interesting is none of the elites have families in Russia. Many of them dual citizens. Like, even it goes as high as both Putin's daughters are married to foreigners and they're living abroad, which I find kind of bizarre. So imagine if we had a very kind of nationalistic politician here who was playing up kind of the confrontation with China, and let's say his daughters were married to Chinese citizens and living in Beijing. And that's what, so Putin, one of Putin's daughters is married to a Dutch guy, and she lives in a mansion in one of the most expensive pieces of real estate in Amsterdam, and the other one lives in London. And it's not unique. All, like, if you go for the top 100 families in Russia, that's situation there. So they kind of have that, they call it klepto state, where they steal all the natural resources, they feed the populace silly nationalistic propaganda, anti-Ukrainian, anti-West, and at the same time they all have, if you listen to the news right now, like you'll see the news reports, there's this Russian government official whose yacht that was like 500 feet long yacht was taken away. This guy's like mansion in Monaco was taken away. Every day you see these like supposed Russian patriots and government officials who are very on paper pro-Russian, but they have jets, real estate, boats, yachts.
Are we talking like
everything in the
oligarchs or
West,
something?
or in like really all these fancy places. So back to Ukraine. Ukraine had a lot of issues up to till recently, and now with the new president, new government, I think the new president is very good in the sense that being kind of Russian speaking, he didn't alienate the East, South, and East, but at the same time, he's kind of very pro-European, so he was supported by the West. So he was elected with over 70% of the votes, so he kind of united the country behind him. And speaking with even people on the ground, my friends, they keep saying that, the roads are getting fixed. He's going after like oligarchs, with these rich kind of corrupt businessmen. The corruption is going down, so Putin feels like it's threatened, where there's going to be a huge, relatively large, independent, successful state nearby, and then my people may have ideas. So I think that's the primary reason for the invasion.
So Putin got his